So everyone's favorite time of year in the holiday season, right? You got Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. But it's a season characterized by giving, joy, happiness, family, all that stuff. But what most people don't talk about is it's also characterized by mass levels of consumption. Most people probably avoid looking at their bank accounts during this time of year, probably thinking, man, did I really have to get my second cousin's wife's best friend a new gold necklace? You're also probably expecting to gain a couple pounds during this time. I know for me, my most gluttonous concoction that I would have during the holidays was what I call Oreo milk. I would take about 4 to 6 Oreos, put them in a cup, crush them up with a spoon, fill it up about 3/4 of the way with milk, and then serve it up with a heaping tablespoon of peanut butter. It sounds gross, but it was really good. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I didn't just have Oreo milk during the holidays. It was something I had pretty frequently, pretty much whenever my parents had Oreos in the house, which, I mean, thanks to them, wasn't that common. Now, a month and a half of excess consumption is not the end of the world, but when this consumption starts to ruin our lives and starts to consume us, that's when things can become troublesome. When people think about addiction, they typically think about, substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, but behavioral addictions are very common and very relevant in today's society. About 11% of people globally suffer from some kind of behavioral addiction. This could be something like gambling addiction, food, sexual stimuli, shopping, even something like exercise. My personal journey with behavioral addiction began on New Year's Eve going into 2021. I was sitting in the living room with my parents, sitting on the floor, like leaning against the couch for whatever reason. I had this snack. It was these chocolate-covered nuts, I believe. And I was eating them. And eventually I lost control. It felt like something had taken over my body. I knew something here was not normal, but I didn't know that this moment would impact the rest of my life going forward. This first binge started my journey with binge eating disorder, filled with some of the darkest times of my life. Eventually, thanks to my sister convincing me and, it just seemed like the right thing to do, I sought out therapy. I remember during my first online session, the therapist was asking me my symptoms, multiple episodes of binge eating per week, feelings of guilt and shame, stuff like that. And I remember her telling me that she would have to write me down as having an anxiety disorder, even though I fit the criteria for the eating disorder, because the insurance would be less likely to cover our sessions if it was for an eating disorder. What a slap in the face, right? In fact, most of these behavioral addictions that I mentioned don't even have an official clinical diagnosis. But anyway, after some time in therapy, my condition got better. But what if it didn't? What if this decision to do cognitive behavioral therapy as my primary treatment for my binge eating disorder, that was pretty much a decision just chosen off of vibes, what if that didn't work? In fact, I believe in most cases, if someone were to go to a psychiatrist, even them wouldn't know the true best treatment for that person. Let me give you an analogy. Let's say you broke your leg, like broken, you can't walk. You somehow make your way to a doctor or a hospital, and you walk in and you're like, my leg is broken, right? And the doctor gives you a clipboard with a bunch of questionnaires on it asking you how you're feeling. So you write down, I'm in pain. And then you give the clipboard back to the doctor, and it's about 15 minutes, they come back and they're like, based on what I see here, your leg is definitely broken, buddy. Here's a cast, and come back in 4 to 6 weeks and we'll see how you're doing. You're gonna be thinking like, that's it? No further testing, no x-ray to see what precise bone in my leg was broken? Well, this is essentially what psychiatry is like today. A psychiatrist will assess your symptoms and then give you a treatment based off of that, which isn't terrible. I'm not saying that this is useless and it never works, but it's definitely flawed. Two people can have a very similar symptom profile, but their symptoms can be driven by completely different underlying biological mechanisms. But I believe a revolution is upon us into the world of computational psychiatry. It's basically a pretty new field that was established in the early 2010s with the goal of adding precision to psychiatry. The word sounds, complicated, but it's basically just using data-driven or theoretical models of mental illness to help diagnose and treat them. I'm going to use one of the data-driven methods as an example for this. One of the goals of computational psychiatry is to identify subtypes of these diagnostic criteria. A subtype, or biotype as some call them, is a further broken down description of one of these diagnostic criteria, but is based on biology. So for example, a recent study took a bunch of people, a large data set with people that experience binge eating episodes, and they broke them down into 3 subtypes. There was a restrained executive functioning subtype that had too much cognitive control and their restraint over their behavior, their restriction, led to binge eating. Then there was a negative emotionality subtype where their emotional dysfunction or dysregulation led to binge eating. And then there was an approach subtype where they exhibited lots of risk-taking behaviors and their impulsivity led to binge eating. Now, these subtypes were identified based off of behavioral characteristics, but what about the brain? Well, using fMRI brain scans, we can see which connections in the brain are altered relative to healthy controls. And guess what? In this study, they found that 2 of these subtypes, the approach and the restraint subtype, had uniquely different or altered connections in their brains relative to these healthy controls, thus providing evidence to support the idea that 2 groups of people with very similar symptom profiles can have their conditions be driven by different neurobiological mechanisms. Now, this is just one study, of course. It'll take way more studies to detect reliable subtypes and also provide clinically interpretable measurements. But once we get there, then we can start doing studies to show which treatment works best for each individual subtype. And at that point, psychiatry would be moving with some precision. Everyone, just take a step back for a moment and imagine a world where someone could walk into a psychiatrist's office and get a brain scan, get other biological or behavioral tests done, and have all this data plugged into a model that then spits out the best treatment plan for them as an individual person. This is what I believe computational psychiatry can provide. No more guessing, no more trial and error, but precision in our diagnosis and treatment. Thank you.